Hi, welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. Today I want to show you a variation on a design I've been asked to recreate for you here as a tutorial. First started making this design probably about 5 or 6 years ago. As you're probably aware, I do love the Sunray design and I'm also a little bit obsessed with stars and things. So let me just show you up here. This is the original design and we're going to make a variation on this piece, which is sun, moon and stars in one go. Now today I'm going to be working in 1.25mm, 0.8mm and 0.4mm gauge raw copper wire. I've also got some 2.5mm faceted iolites to enhance the gems, to enhance one of the pieces just a little bit further. It's totally optional, you don't have to use the gemstones if you don't want to. It's just something that you can do to make it a little bit more unique, and there's various places that you can add them to. Now there are a couple of segments in this design which I have devoted videos for. So the Sunray Petal design, there are a couple of videos that utilise this and will discuss it in more complete detail, as well as the pentagram or the 5-pointed star design, which again I've been teaching this about 6 years or so, and I've got a really super easy way to create that. So if you've not seen those before, do go and have a quick look at them, because it will help you with this complete project that we're going to teach today, which is the sun, moon and stars wall art. Or I mean, if you wanted to size it down and make it into jewellery, then it is a beautiful piece to work with. So down to the board, we're going to start off with the 1.25mm raw copper. This has got a lovely feel to it. I'm just going to give it some warmth, and then I'm going to create my first segment, and I'm going to use an oversized mandrel which I have, which is actually a bangle mandrel, but this is going to give me the basic round shape that we're going to work with, and a little bit to spare just in case I decide to add a little bit of flair later on. So I'm just going to go a little bit further than I want to and then size it up like so. Just going to withdraw that out of the way and we'll look at the shape that we've created. So what we're looking to do here is to generate the basics of the piece. This is a pretty good size that I'm happy with. So I'm going to start off by generating an upright on one of those sides. And on this segment I would turn that to become a wrapped loop. So I'd pop in with my flat facing pliers, and rather than we normally do with a wrapped loop coming forwards, I'm going to do this on the same plane, so everything is flat as if it's between two panes of glass. Normally I would turn the bail through 90 degrees so that you could make that a wearable piece of jewellery, but we're going to keep that flat to make it easy to pop on the wall as decor. So popping in with my round nose pliers, I'm just going to put a round form at the top there, draw that all the way around, and this means that you can pop that on a hanging loop or a nail or a piece of ribbon, whatever you fancy. Now there is again a complete video dedicated to the perfect wrapped loop, so you could spend a little bit more time getting that perfect. Just going to give that a bit of a squeeze up and tidy that out of the way for now. I'm going to leave a fairly long length over here, purely because if you have some extra wire in your makes, it means that you can change your mind, add decals later. So for instance, if I wanted to put a nice coil on there, I absolutely could, but if there's so much wire left here at the moment that if I wanted to add a really long coil, decorate it with gemstones and turn that around over the face of where we're going to hang it, then you've still got the opportunity to do that without having to add any extra wire. So it's always worth having a little bit extra left over besides. Back down to the board here. Just get rid of that bit of wire that's ingrained itself into my workboard, like so. So what we're going to do is cut another piece of wire, and I might just trim some of this away because it's I've got more than I actually want to use. But the next thing that we want to do is to generate the crescent moon shape to sit inside here. Now you could, if you wanted to, tie this end around the upright to complete the circle, so that you can see exactly where you want your crescent moon to sit. You can, of course, if you prefer, utilise the mandrel or tin of beans, whatever shape you've got to hand to create that arc. We're just looking to make a bit of a moon shape at this moment, and to go from approximately 12 o'clock to approximately 6 o'clock. I'm just going to sit that like so for now. I'm going to do this quite roughly, just so that you get the idea. I don't want to spend too much time faffing around. And I'm going to trim away the ends and just put a simple loop at either end with my round nose pliers. A little bit of a loop just there, like so. I'm not going to completely close that, but I am going to make it flat so that it stays in the two-dimensional plane. with this design, it pays to keep adding it back into where you want it to sit to make sure you're happy. You might prefer to have a much thicker section, like a 3/4 moon. I actually want to have quite a skinny little moon over on the side. It's entirely up to you how you do that though. So I think I'm just going to trim a couple of mil away from the top, and then with the round nose pliers again to generate that loop at the far end. And again, I'm not going to completely close it just yet, but I am going to make that flat so that it sits. There's that nasty bit that went astray. Bring that back to the centre of the board and sit it down. So I'm quite happy with the aesthetic that we're looking at on the board at the moment. So as I say, you can play around with that shape. You could have a half moon if you really wanted to, but that would interrupt where your star sits. I think a skinny little crescent moon just gives you the hint of a moon without taking up too much of the design. So the next thing that I want to do is join the crescent shape into the main frame. Now the reason I've left this wire untwisted at the moment and free is because I find it easier to do a figure of 8 weave when I've got access to both of these. Like so. So what I'm going to do is show you now a little tip about handling wire that has come to you without a spool. So if it has come on a little coil of wire like so, and you don't have a central section to hold that all tidy, many of our wires come on beautiful sort of plastic or wooden reels that you can utilise, and the wire spins freely off them, which is great. Sometimes your wire comes to you like so. So I'm just going to unwind the end. Now a really handy hint, which, you know, I've been working with wire for a good few years now. I've only just discovered this. I'm going to pop that onto my wrist. Obviously, if you have intolerances to metal, you're probably not going to be working with raw copper wire anyway, but I don't find that there's any issue. I just wear that on my wrist, and then I can unspool it. If it gets a little bit tight, you can just loosen that off. If you work directly from a section of wire that doesn't have a centre, and if you keep that in a bag and you're pulling a little bit out, you're pulling a little bit out, what can happen is it gets twisted around itself and you end up having to cut the wire and add a new section on, which is annoying. You don't want it to be imperfect if you can possibly help it. So putting it on the wrist will keep it under control. So I'm going to start off. Just pop that out of the way a second, and I'm going to wind around several times at the base of my little crescent shape, and I will just tighten that up in a second. I'm going to wrap that round a good 7 or 8 times just to make sure that I've got a really, really tight coil on the end there. I'm going to come in with the pliers and just turn that around so that I know that it's all sat down neatly. Scooch that neat and tidy, pop it into position, and then slide the wire down to the base. Now, you can play around with this to your heart's content and make it as tidy and as neat and exactly the shape that you want it to be. Now, for this design, I'm going to come over the top of the wire that's sitting inside the frame and underneath the frame itself. And to begin with, at both ends of my crescent moon, and remember that's at 6 o'clock and 12 o'clock, I'm going to go 3 times around the outside. So that's 1, 2 and 3 before coming back down underneath, and this is one of the reasons I like to have those bits open so that they're not tied up together just yet. 1 and 2 and 3 around this side. Hold that back up. One thing that will happen is as you're working, the piece of metal that's sitting freely in the centre will move around, so you'll need to, as you go, keep checking that that's exactly where you want it to sit. So 3 around, whoops-a-daisy, around the outside one, like so, and then 3 around the inside one, keeping quite a good grip with your non-dominant hand to make sure that you're getting the crescent shape that you want. As you fill this in and you get up about 1/3 of the way, what I started doing was winding twice around the inside, 3 times around the outside, all the way up to around again to about 2/3 of the way done, and then I reverted to 3 on the outside, 3 on the inside. So I'm just going to remove this now, and I'll show you what that looks like. It'll be very boring if you watch me do the whole thing, and time-lapse is also quite difficult to edit as well. So I'm just going to pop this one out of the way and pop in the one that I began working on, all without dropping it on the floor, I hope. So here we go. This is basically the same design, so you've got your wrapped loop at the top in the same dimension, and you've got all that free space around one side, and then this has wound on, and as I say, around about a third of the way up I switched from 3 and 3 to 2 and 3, and that's because you're looking to fill more space around the outside than on the inside. It's a greater length, a greater distance, so if you want that to kind of look neat, then that is one way that you can achieve it. So that's still open at this stage. I just wanted to show you what we could do to achieve the crescent moon. Now the next section I'm going to be using raw copper in a 0.8mm gauge, and I'm going to be creating the Sunray petal design in an open length, and then I'm going to hammer it lightly until it fits around the outside here, which is currently naked. If I show you what we're working towards, then I can show you how we get to that. So I've made my sun, I've hammered this lightly, and that is going to fit around the outside. That is our next step, and I will show you how to achieve this now. So I have here a reel of 0.8mm gauge raw copper wire. I'm going to work off the reel because it's a really nice and simple design to create, and also it means that there's no wastage. You will create exactly the amount that you want to. So I'm just going to show you twice how to do that Sunray petal design. So if you pop down to the board with me here, just give that a little bit of heat. I find it easier to flip it over on this side. I'm going to start off with an upright, take it all the way past, make that a little bit sharper if you can, draw it back so you're getting a little bit of a smooth arc. If I pull that out the way, it should be easier to see, and then add a little kick on the top like so. My bent chain nose pliers are absolutely perfect for this, like so. Draw it back around, and you can see I'm just using the warmth that we just put into the wire to create that Sunray petal design. And just for the sake of keeping it where I want it to be at the moment, I'm just going to give that a little bit of hardening and pinch at the top here. I'm supporting it so that one side doesn't cross over the top of the other side. Just give that a bit of a pinch, hold it like so until you get the dimension that you're looking for. Pop in with your fine pointed pliers like so. Again, these are flat facing pliers. These are bent chain nose. Give that a bit of a squeeze, continue on your way, and then just repeat until you get the length of work you're looking for. So again, we're creating a series of arcs and bends. Back in the same direction, arc that around because we created it nice and warm a moment ago. Give that a bit of a squeeze down whilst supporting it. Flatten down all the way back, and then like so continue on your way. So I'm just going to cut this away and get the wire out of the board so that we don't accidentally knock it on the floor, and I'm going to show you now how to just shape that to fit your design, and also how to hammer it lightly and to do so without losing the shape that you've created. So what we would need to do is find the curvature that we're after, have a look at that and see how much we need to alter that central line. So just make sure everything sits neatly together before drawing this around on the arc that you have created for your sun side of your piece. So that's a little bit too narrow, so we just pull that back slightly. You can see that that's going to fit quite neatly into position. Imagine that we've done enough to fill the whole gap. So I'm just going to pop down now my block and my rubber underside. That's just to deaden the noise slightly. Now before you start hammering, you're going to make sure that these shapes are all exactly as you want them to be, and because we're going to hit this in a moment, it doesn't matter if you mark the surface slightly. And just draw that to make sure that you're happy with the shapes, and also that you've got one continuous line, because we're going to sit that against the other wire in just a second. So I'm using a very lightweight brass headed hammer, which undoes itself as you whack things. Now to begin with, I'm going to support the central section and hammer on the petal sides. We are both changing the profile of the wire so that it becomes much flatter, and we're also strengthening it and giving it a really lovely sheen as well. So once we are happy that our petals or our sun rays are in the correct orientation, we're going to very carefully support the shape that we've created. This arc is really important. We're going to support that. ensuring that we retain the shape that we've created so that we know it will fit the piece. So I'm just going to draw this out of the way now and tidy up a little bit, like so. And then I'm going to pop back down to the board in just a second with all my bits and pieces. So here we are. You've seen how to do the crescent moon. You've seen how to create the sun petals. So if we pop that in just so, there's a dog hair on here, what a surprise. I've got a spare length here of 0.4mm gauge raw copper wire. Now I would work with the reel if at all possible. So let me just see if I can find that. Cut it away from the other section that we were working on, like so. Pop that back on my wrist. As we discussed, it's a really handy way of keeping that under control. And then we'll find the end and we'll start down at the bottom, down at this side, because this top end is where it's open and that means we'll be able to weave in that direction. So I'm going to start with a good couple of inches of spare wire over the end. And what that means is I can start a little bit away from the end, like so. So if I go 2 sun rays in and I start winding around, and I think I'll go for 3 winds between each upright, like so. And then I might pop a wire down the centre, like so. So that's gone inside the sunray petal. And then another 3 winds around the central section and the frame that we made to hold the sunray petals together. And I said I think 3 around each will look quite attractive. And then 1 up the centre there. And then as many as you can fit on the end segment. Now I've trimmed the end of my sunray petal section to around about 5mm. So I'm going to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wraps. And then I'll find a clever way to integrate this tail so that it sits neatly. So I'd probably just pop that up inside, grab hold of the finer pliers and continue wrapping until it meets together and give that a squeeze to give it a nice aesthetic. And then you can continue in this direction. So that's why we're working with the open end, making sure that your sun rays sit on the outside and they don't slip underneath. So this time I'm going to come up between the sunray petals and just around the main frame, down around the main frame, and then 3 times around this section. And this will tie it both neatly and decoratively and hopefully permanently to the framework that we've created. So you can see how that's going to finish up. I'm now going to try to extricate my wrist. That's worked quite nicely, because I think you've seen just how that is going to come together. When you get to the other end, just wrap as many times as you can around the tail that you've left yourself, and you can take it from there. So the last section is to create the 5-pointed star. Now there is a dedicated video on this channel to the 5-pointed star, so I'm actually not going to make that for you right now, but I'm going to bring in one that I've created and show that to you now. So here's the piece. And what I've done with this is I've got an open loop at the top with a little tail of wire around the end. There's also a dedicated video on this channel called Wiring Gemstones onto Frames, and that's all I've done is I've used that exact same technique to wire just down 1 bar of this star with some absolutely beautiful faceted iolites. Now you could wrap around every single section on the star if you wanted to, but I quite like that look. I think it's really pretty. So if you come down to the board with me now, I'll show you how we're going to fit this all together. So obviously you would continue winding all the way around until your sun petals sit on the design. Just hooked that together. How wonderful. You can scooch that around a little bit if you need to make that fit. Once your sun petals are in their final position, you would take this tail around the neck we've created, like so, and just do another wrapped loop, maybe 3 or 4 wraps, dependent on how far you have left yourself space-wise. And then you can see this loop that we created earlier. We left ours open, but you can just tighten that up slightly. So you can see what I've done with this star is I've left my loop open. I've opened it out sideways, and what that means is that I can now draw that through like so, slip it into position. It does go, you just have to kind of twist it around a little bit until it sits, and then push that together and you can close it up. So that is the finished piece, or it will be when I've just tied it up. What I will do is I'll just take a quick photo of that when I've completed it and put it at the front of the video so you can see what you're working towards. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, a complete project for you today rather than a technique or a mini tutorial. If you like what you've seen, do please hit like and comment if you've not already done so about anything that you want to see in the future. Do press subscribe, and if you're feeling the love, do also share the tutorial. Thank you so much for sticking with me. It's an absolute pleasure to be in your home, and I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Many thanks. Bye for now.